So in this segment, I wanted to tackle this really just frustrating video from Phil. I watched it and I was like, ugh. I'll give you my direct reaction, actually.
Brother,
and I'll explain why I kind of had that reaction in the video. So yeah, let's have a listen to what he's got to say. I've got the pledges on the left side of my screen, but he'll bring them up on his side of the screen. But if you want to actually go through it with me, I'll just put the link in the description.
It's about the 10 pledges, and there were 10 numbered pledges, but each pledge came with some specific explainers. So which are the pledges? The 10 headline pledges, which you could argue are all still there, or the individual detail?
It's a bold statement to argue that they are still there, because again, these are wishy-washy statements. You know, things like economic injustice, social justice, climate justice, promote peace and human rights, things like this. These are kind of very broad and vague things. You know, Theresa May talked about the burning injustices and how she wanted to, improve the country and things like that. So, you know, the argument of they are still there, I mean, sure. But point being is they've been watered down heavily, or a lot of the key specifics of this stuff has been taken out or doesn't exist anymore. So you can argue Labour are still for economic justice, that's fine, but the key specifics of it show that they are not there. And we'll break down each one as he goes through it, because it gets progressively worse for the first two anyways.
Which are more unambiguous. If it's the 10 headline pledges, they're intact. If it's the individual details, then there were actually, by my count, 45 individual pledges presented, and 82% of them are still intact. And in actual fact, that's me being harsh on Starmer, because in the interests of being devil's advocate, percentage of pledges retained would justice. So, could mean anything. What does it mean? Increase income tax for the top 5% of earners. Yeah, that's gone. Reverse the Tories' cuts in corporation tax. That's not gone, although technically Labour don't have to do that because the Tories did that themselves. Clamp down on tax avoidance. Yeah, that's there.
So actually, Labour did announce a policy on tax just within the last few hours.
HMRC crackdown. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says today it probably is the case that if you put more money and effort in, I think you're talking about spending £500 million for more staff, you will get more back. The difficulty is it is genuinely uncertain how much that will raise.
Well, these aren't my numbers that I've plucked out of thin air. The head of the National Audit Office gave a speech in January where he said the tax gap, which is £36 billion, that's the gap between the tax that is owed and that is actually collected, is £36 billion. And he says that you could realistically bring in £6 billion of that. So many people who want to do the right thing.
The criticism is already that this is small change in every sense.
I mean, that's true, but the point being is they have actually announced something finally on tax avoidance. So I guess we'll give him this one as well, because this is what you call actually being charitable. So I don't think they've actually done anything on tax avoidance. Not really.
For large corporations, yeah. No stepping back from our core principles. Again, could mean anything. Not going to count that one. But again, you know, so economic.
So you know,
justice. There's one aspect of it that has gone. The rest of it.
One aspect that has gone. No, I'd say there's two. I think the income tax one, which was the more important one, really, that's gone. Reverse the Tories' cuts to corporation tax. I mean, that's fine, I guess. But we don't know what they actually do on tax avoidance. You know, dealing with large corporations, they haven't given any specifics. So I'm going to say that one's not there either. So again, like, I think he's being very generous.
If it's still there. Social justice, abolish universal credit. Yeah, that's not a policy anymore as far as I know. End the Tories' cruel sanctions regime. Yeah, that's still policy.
No, not as...
Set a national goal for well-being to make health as important as GDP. Yep, that's in there.
Again, like, they haven't really said what they're going to do to make health as important as GDP, so that's not really true either. When you look at, you know, they're talking about the NHS and stuff, like, they're going to let the private sector, you know, they want to use the private sector more in the NHS, even though it comes from the same pool of, essentially healthcare workers. So that's not really going to do it. And, you know, so this is about Labour wanting to use the private sector capacity more, and we'll mention this again later in the video because it's worth mentioning twice. But yeah, it was talking about essentially using the private sector and then really attacking people over it, people who are mad at this stupid policy.
You got an article, I should say, in The Sun yesterday where you talked about saying we will use spare capacity in the private sector to cut the waiting lists. Middle-class lefties cry betrayal. Why use language like that?
And, you know, writing in The Sun, it's a yikes from me, I'm afraid. capacity, like the machines and stuff the private sector has. Surely we'd be better off buying the machines ourselves rather than renting it from the private sector. So that's not really true either. And when you talk about things like social justice, right, when we look at what the Labour Party actually going to do, this is the bit that's pretty horrendous for me anyways, because they're going to keep the 2-child cap in place.
Anniversary of the 2-child benefits limit. Just last week, former Prime Minister Gordon Brown said, quote, "The 2-child rule is iniquitous. The majority of 3-child families are now in poverty, and that's a terrible indictment on our country." Will you scrap that policy?
Well, as I said, I'm not going to make any commitments without saying where the money is going to come from, because the people who pay the price when you pay fast and loose with the public...
So this argument doesn't really make sense, because benefits like these, that money does come back into the economy, because, again, it helps people spend money in the economy, and that helps boost it. And you are also, taking people out of poverty, or helping take people out of poverty, which means they're going to be less reliant on healthcare, especially long-term, and mental health services as well, because there's no way, children should be going to school or, like, having to be, dealing with hunger in this country. Like, it doesn't make sense. And that can have an effect on people's mental health. It does affect the way, you think. And when we look at the specifics of this, Labour's deputy leader described it as obscene and inhumane, the 2-child cap. Starmer saying we must scrap the punitive sanctions, the 2-child limit. But in a BBC interview last summer, Starmer said he was not changing that policy if Labour won power. So this argument that Labour are for social justice, I don't think that's true at all, honestly.
Invest in services that help shift to a preventative approach. Yep, that's very much part of their NHS paper.
I mean, they're not really moving to preventative approach. I mean, they are going to boost scanners. I guess it's a bit wishy-washy. I guess we can give them that. But the only real way for them to do it is to tackle the GP crisis. And I don't think the GPs are too kind of sure of Labour's plan. I think they want to bring them into being employed by the NHS, which would work. But you'd have to work with them to find a longer-term solution, I think.
Stand up for universal services and defend the NHS. Support the abolition of tuition fees. We know that is being watered down.
That's not been watered down. That's been scrapped. They're not going to scrap tuition fees. When we look at it, right?
What about university tuition fees then? Will you remain committed to scrapping them in your first term?
Pledges, Andrew. So the answer to these questions is yes.
So university tuition fees being scrapped will be in a Starmer manifesto?
Yes, I think we are going to set out a fairer solution. And Justin, so
but it won't be the abandoning of tuition fees, will it?
Well, we are likely to move on from that commitment
Right.
because we do find ourselves in a different financial situation. But
So it's not watering down. This is a cancellation of policy. That's what this is. You can't argue it both ways. It's a cancellation. You can't say, we're going to abolish tuition fees and then do very little about it, which we haven't seen, specifics on it, but they're not going to do it. So that's not watering down. That's cancellation. That's the difference. Support the abolition of tuition fees. They're not going to do that. So that's not true. Investing in long life learning, I think they are going to do that with colleges. So it's a bit weird he's kind of missed that one out. So that one I would give. But again, it's not looking too positive when you look at the specifics. You look at the main important ones. They're not doing too great.
And invest in lifelong learning. So again, out of that, 2 of them have gone.
So, the important ones like getting rid of universal credit, which is a major problem in itself. So set a national goal for well-being. I mean, that's wishy-washy. Again, I don't think that's it. They've even done that. And defending NHS, they haven't done that because they're allowing the private sector in.
You got an article, I should say, in The Sun yesterday where you talked about saying we will use spare capacity in the private sector to cut the waiting lists. Middle-class lefties cry betrayal. Why use language like that?
Also, further to this, on the private sector point, this from Guardian columnist and journalist author of Who Wants Normal. She said, as a working class lefty, I can tell where's that lining the pockets of private health firms isn't just ideologically flawed, it's inefficient too. Many private staff and NHS moonlighters, and some even share facilities, fund the NHS, not big business. So the whole point is you put the money into the NHS, you don't put it into the private service, especially when it's ineffective. So once again, a swing and a miss from both of these goons. That's the point. You've got what's his face, Wes Streeting saying the NHS not fit for purpose and blah blah blah, and allowing the private sector in. That's not defending the NHS. That's weakening it further, which is something Labour did with PFI contracts with the New Labour. There were lots of things that they did to privatise the NHS. So that's not defending it at all. So that one's out.
3, climate justice. Put the Green New Deal at the heart of everything we do. Still policy.
That's not policy either, though, because the point of the Green New Deal, that Green New Deal was to push growth. So it's not going to be at the heart of everything we do, because that was meant to power Labour's growth engine. That was the problem. he's pulled back on it massively. Starmer defends U-turn on 28 billion green spending. So this idea that the Green New Deal is going to be at the heart of everything Labour do is simply not true. That's why when they ask about how you're going to grow the economy, they barely have an answer, because the Green New Deal was meant to power the economy. So that's simply untrue.
No issue more important to our future than the climate emergency. A Clean Air Act to tackle pollution locally. Yep, still there. Demand international action on climate rights. Yep. So that's in its entirety still there.
I mean, they're barely doing that in the UK, to be fair. They said they're going to keep the oil licenses and things like that the Tories have just granted. So, how are you going to demand international action on climate rights when we've just expanded drilling in the North Sea and Labour are back there? So that one's out as well, in my opinion.
4, promote peace and human rights. No more illegal wars. Well, until they actually instigate an illegal.
Well, peace and human rights. They're going to keep the Tories anti-protest laws. So I wouldn't say that's really promoting human rights, is it?
Well, we can't say that that's been scrapped. Introduce a Prevention of Military Intervention Act.
They did also support the Houthis, and they are supporting. They were supporting heavily the Israelis in their actions. They're also being really weird about stopping arms sales to Israel as well. So I'm going to say that one's out. Introduce a military intervention act. And putting human rights at the start, how everything that's not true. Review all arms sales. I mean, he's going to point out they're always under review, but again, clearly those reviews, the system isn't working if we're still arming a country that has just killed human rights workers. Not just killed more human rights workers, and have killed kind of foreign nationals for no reason.
So, yep, Starmer was asked about this year, in fact, just a few months ago. That's still there as far as we can tell. I don't know.
I mean, they're not really there promoting international peace, are they? Because they backed Israel explicitly when, cutting off food, cutting off water. It took them months to come around to the right position, and that's because I think the SNP really forced them.
Exactly what it is, but it's still there.
Israel explicitly when, cutting off food, cutting off water. It took them months to come around to the right position, and that's because I think the SNP really forced them.
Exactly what it is, but it's still there.
Is appropriate, cutting off power, cutting off water.
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously, everything should be done within international law.
Human rights at the heart of foreign policy. Review, again, they've not said that they're not going to do that. Review all UK arms sales. To be honest, that happens naturally anyway. Everyone reviews them all the time.
Again, they're under review now. And nothing has changed with Israel, so clearly they need to have a more robust mechanism for it. Maybe they should publish the legal advice they get when it comes to certain countries we are arming, considering we're arming countries like Saudi Arabia and things like that.
Topically at the moment, you're supposed to do it based on legal advice, and the government seems to be hiding that. And make us
And if Labour wanted to see that legal advice, they could try and force a vote in Parliament, so both parties are really hiding behind that.
Force for international peace and justice. Again, all of that is still formal policy, every single word.
It's not really, though, formal policy, is it? That's not even true at all. Pushing for human rights is simply untrue. They're going to keep all of the bad anti-protest bills. They're arming, despotic nations. How do you promote human rights when you're arming some of the worst countries in the world?
5, common ownership. Public services should be in public hands, not making profits for shareholders. Support common ownership of rail, mail, energy and water. End outsourcing the NHS, local government and justice system. Now, I've actually counted that as 6 things, but I've just realised I probably should have counted it as 7. But in terms of common ownership of rail, really easily, because they've already got a formal policy for that.
Yeah, that one's fine.
Mail and water, they're not promoting nationalising it, but it says here support common ownership. Now, there will be a test with, of course, Thames Water at least.
Again, it's kind of they're playing games here with common ownership versus. So this is what he said when he was asked about his pledges on nationalisation.
Principled question: will you nationalise the big 6 energy companies? Yes or no?
No.
No, you will not. This is what you said as part of your 10 pledges.
Oh, sped up. Sorry.
Public services should be in public hands, not making profits for shareholders. Support common ownership of rail, mail, energy and winter. You promised that 18 months ago, and now you're saying no. Why?
I don't see nationalisation there. There is
what else does public hands mean?
There's a world. Well, public services should be in public hands, but when it comes to something like energy, we've got an immediate problem in the next few months that we've got to solve. And then when it comes to common ownership, I'm pragmatic about this. I do not agree with the argument that says we must be ideological. Look what happens.
So what does common ownership mean if it doesn't mean nationalisation?
Look what happens when we're ideological about this. Track and trace put into private sector £37 billion when we were arguing it'd be better in the public sector with local authorities. So I'd be pragmatic about it, and where common ownership is value for money for the taxpayer and delivers better services, then there should be common ownership.
I mean, Royal Mail was way better under public ownership than it's been under private ownership. So this is a guy, he's just Weasley. It's very Weasley, and to not call this out, in my opinion, is very Weasley as well. It's very clear what he said there. It's very clear he's backed down. Common ownership should be there for the public good. Well, clearly these private companies are not doing that. Nationalisation, but when he was asked during the leadership contest about nationalising key utilities, Starmer said he would do it. And then when he was asked about, I think it was by Andrew Neil, he said he wouldn't do it and he never supported it. Oh, it might have been Koonsberg, actually. I think he told Andrew Neil he does support it. Then he told Laura Koonsberg he didn't support it and that he never did. So that's not really true.
Companies.
I mean, you can try and argue about the pledges thing, but this is what he said. This is literally his words to Andrew Neil, the clip I'm talking about.
Leadership. The 2019 Labour commitments to nationalise water, energy, rail, the Royal Mail, they'll all be in Labour's next election manifesto.
I've made that commitment. The pledges I've made indicate the direction of travel, but I am well aware that there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done between now and 2024, because that 2024 manifesto has to reflect the state of the nation in 2024 and face the late 2020s.
And things change. I understand.
Well,
I understand
a lot
that,
of things
and I
will
don't
change.
want you. I'm not consider asking you to write the manifesto, but those 4 industries will be in the Labour manifesto for nationalisation come 2024.
They will. They're baseline indicators of where we're going. I think that we'll need to think about how we do it. Well, they will be. They are. What I'm saying to the members here is we need to build the case from where we are now to 2024. Lots of things are going to change between now.
I mean, there it is there. He said it. You know, he was asked a question about nationalising them. He said he's going to do it. These are baseline indicators. So, I mean, this argument, again, is just awful. You know, the problem is these people act like the internet doesn't exist.
At the moment, they're hesitant about the cost and time needed to fully nationalise. But when it comes to it, are they going to allow these private companies to carry on taking the mickey and prioritising their shareholders? Or will they do something to make sure they're focusing on the customers? Their water policies would suggest that there is going to be some state control of these water companies in the next Parliament. But we'll wait on that one. I'm happy to call that one scrapped for now, even though in reality I'm not sure.
I think that one is kind of scrapped, to be fair. I think they will put them in a position where they can be nationalised a lot easier and a lot cheaper down the line. But officially, on the record, that one's scrapped, and I think we can both agree on that one.
But in terms of energy, Great British Energy is a fairly large part of their offer. And in terms of ending outsourcing of NHS, local government and justice system, I'd mostly focus on the NHS and justice system there. There are positive policies to bring in a massive level of insourcing into the NHS. And
You got an article, I should say, in The Sun yesterday where you talked about saying we will use spare capacity in the private sector to cut the waiting lists. Middle-class lefties cry betrayal.
Criminal justice system. I don't specifically know on local government, though.
With this one, like, you know, you've got, again, West Street and constantly going out there talking about wanting to use more private care companies or whatever with the NHS. So this idea that they're going to, you know, end outsourcing is simply untrue. And that one, the fact that he kind of glossed over that is really bad, especially because West Street was seeing it recently as well. With local government, I think doing more insourcing would be good. And obviously the justice system, you know, given how big the judiciary is in this country, like insourcing for that makes a lot of sense as well. I think they are very reliant on agency workers, and you pay huge fees for that.
I'd actually missed that when I was typing this out. 6, defend migrants' rights, full voting rights for EU and nationals. They've gone quiet on that one. They haven't specifically ruled it out.
They haven't gone quiet. No, they have ruled out. They've ruled out full voting rights. So here in this article from Friday the 15th of September 23, votes for EU citizens missing from Labour's policy plan. Plans to extend voting rights to EU citizens have not made it into Labour's official list of policies ahead of next year's election, despite Starmer previously endorsing the policy. Now, Labour did originally back the policy early in last year, but they backed out on it when the media kind of said like, well, how is it fair that EU citizens that have settled status in the UK can vote, but UK citizens that have settled status in other countries can't vote? So again, a simple Google search would have told him that that's wrong for EU nationals. They officially ruled that out because when the policy was leaked, or when he was asked about it, they told, oh, we still stand up for this policy. And then when asked about it consistently, Labour frontbenchers said they don't support voter rights for EU nationals. So that's simply untrue.
Out, but I don't think we're expecting it in the manifesto. So we could say that one's scrapped. Defend free...
It's just reaching. It's just this kind of... he says that he was going to be harsh and play devil's advocate. Like, he's simply not doing that. He's playing defence for them.
Movement as we leave the EU. Again, they're talking about sort of... small-scale freedom of movement, but you could say that one has also fallen.
Again, like when he was asked about this, what Starmer said is, as we leave the EU, so we're not in the EU anymore, so he's not going to defend freedom of movement. So again, like...
by the wayside, because they're refusing.
Immigration, again, in the last few years. So in the leadership campaign, we can see on one side of the screen, one of your pledges was to defend free movement as we leave the EU, a leadership pledge in 2020. And then compare that to a Mail on Sunday interview. Freedom of movement is a red line for me. It won't come back under my
Well, let's just look at those.
These are diametrically opposed.
Of course they're not. Look, defend free movement as we leave the EU. Right, we've left. No, so now we've got to face the future we're in. We're out of the EU, free movement has gone. So the question then comes, well...
So yeah, he's not going to defend freedom of movement, and so again, really extremely charitable, again for no reason. Can't rejoin the single market, but that's a different problem.
An immigration system based on compassion and dignity, that is still their policy.
No, it's not, because they said they're not going to allow... They support the Conservative policy on not allowing dependents, care workers with dependents coming into the country. How is that compassion and dignity, saying to people, oh, you can come here and work, but you can't bring your elderly parents or your kids or your significant other? That's really untrue. Honestly, that's a shocker, that one, that he's let that one go through.
End indefinite detention and call for the closure of centres such as Yarl's Woods. As far as I know, that is still their policy. They've not said they're moving against that. 7, strengthen workers' rights and trade unions. Work shoulder to shoulder with trade unions to stand up for working people, tackle insecure work and low pay. They've got specific policies for that. In fact, it's going to be one of the first pieces of legislation that they push when they're in government.
That's true for the most part. These ones are fine. The only thing is they did say they were going to get rid of 0 hours contracts, and then they changed it to only get rid of exploitative 0 hours contracts. And now it's very unclear what their actual policy is regarding things like that. And 0 hours contracts are one of the worst things you can have, because it's up to the employer when you work. There's no fixed hours, so you could be working 30, 40 hours a week one week and 0 hours the next week. So I'm a bit nervous on that one. I'm going to have to see specifics on what they come out with, especially when Rayner comes out with a statement on workers' rights, and then within about a week she gets undermined by the Labour Party. So that one's a wait and see.
Repeal the Trade Union Act. Yep, still policy. Oppose Tory attacks on the right to take industrial action and the weakening of workplace rights. Yes, they're going to strengthen workplace rights. They have very specific policies for that.
Yeah, more stuff from work from home and things like that. So this stuff is fine.
8, radical devolution of power, wealth and opportunity. Push power, wealth and opportunity away from Whitehall. Yes, that is still a big part of their policy. A federal system to devolve powers. Yep, still there. Including through regional investment banks and control over regional industrial strategy. It's something they're plugging very hard right now in the local election campaign.
I mean, this stuff's fine, but again, we're going to have to see specifics on that. Like, what specifically are they going to allow local governments to take more power of? I think they're going to do stuff regarding planning permission, which, again, building on the green belt, I'm a bit miffed about. I think building on brown sites makes more sense. But yeah, I mean, until we see specific details about how far they're going to go with this stuff and what specifics they're going to include, I guess we can keep this one.
Abolish the House of Lords, replace it with an elected chamber or regions and nations. So they've ruled out doing that in the next Parliament, so I'll call that scrapped. But they are still going to be removing hereditary peers at least, and it is still Starmer's official policy to replace the entire chamber at some point. But I'll call it scrapped because there's not a definite plan to do the whole thing in the next Parliament.
And again, he's being very generous that it is scrapped. They're not going to do it. They backed out of it. So again, this idea of, for the sake of the video, I'll call it scrapped. Oh, I don't want to do it. No, it's scrapped. Just be honest with the people.
And promises are, of course, all about one Parliament. 9, equality. Pull down obstacles that limit opportunities and talent. we are the party of the Equal Pay Act, sure starts, BAME representation and the abolition of Section 28. We must build on that for a new decade. There were no specific policies in there. So the fact that they are still talking about the need to expand opportunities for those who face glass ceilings, because that is still formal party policy, they're still sticking to that.
I mean, I guess we'll have to give them a pass until we see something in the manifesto that addresses it specifically. But again, I will keep going back to Theresa May talking about burning injustices and things like that and doing absolutely nothing about it. So that one's a doubt, in my opinion, but we'll give them that.
And the last one, effective opposition to the Tories. Forensic effective opposition to the Tories in Parliament. Yep. Linked up to our mass membership in a professional election operation. Can't really argue against that if you look at the by-election results and the current course for the general election.
Again, people like John Curtis have said this it's more like it's anti-Tory rather than pro-Labour. There was one point I did want to address, which is, again, in the polls, the Tories were actually up, during COVID, which again makes sense because you have the rally around the flag effect. But it was during Partygate that Labour did gain a lead. And then you've got, obviously, the election of, you had, Liz Truss, the budget, and Labour's lead spiking. So, to attribute a lot of the success and this forensic approach from Labour, I think is very disingenuous, in my opinion. Ball's fallen to in the box and they put the ball in the net. That's the most credit I'll give them for the most part, I think.
Never lost sight of the voters lent to the Tories in 2019. Yeah, they look like taking all of the red wall back.
Yep, and the only thing with that is, that's been given back to them. John Curtis explains that the UK has recaptured them. Whether you want to say that's down to Labour or down to the fact that these aren't really Brexit supporters anymore, that one's up to you. But again, we'll always refer back to the GOAT John Curtis on a lot of this stuff because he has actual, access to data and things like that, and he's a real expert in this area. So I think when John Curtis says stuff like this, more like an anti-Tory vote rather than a pro-Labour vote, it does make me a bit nervous, especially when Labour are losing kind of support in their key areas as well. Like, it does kind of make me a lot more nervous, I think, for the election at the end of the 2020s.
Unite our party, promote pluralism and improve our culture. Very subjective, but at the same time, the Labour Party is pulling together like I've not seen in some time.
I mean, that's what happens when you kick out a load of dissenters, to be fair.
Robust action to eradicate the scourge of anti-Semitism. Yeah, some people didn't like that, but that's what's been done.
I mean, I don't know who's he at in there, but when you look at things like the Ford report, when you look at the racism towards kind of black and other ethnic minorities within the Labour Party, I mean, sure, you've gotten rid of anti-Semitism, but you've just allowed racism, other forms to take hold in the party. So, I'll give you that one, yeah, because you didn't say end the scourge of racism in the Labour Party, so I can give you that one. But again, not exactly the big Dobsky you're making it out to be.
And maintain
in terms of dealing with all forms of racism.
In our collective links with the unions. Yes.
Yeah, that one. The unions have threatened to quit, but I don't think they'll ever quit Labour. So
basically, vast majority of them are still there. Vast majority of them.
Well, let's have a look. Right, if we look at especially the specifics, right, I've got the list in front of me now. So let's go through this. That first one. So we'll do the ones that they've gotten rid of, in my opinion, right? Okay, so let's have a look. Increase income tax for the top 5% of earners. They've gotten rid of that. The corporation tax one, the Tories have given them back, so that one's fine. No stepping back from our core principles. They have stepped back from their core principles. So that's not true. So that's two gone. Abolish universal credit. They're not going to get rid of universal credit, so there's that. The national goal for well-being to make health as important as GDP. I mean, I don't care enough to understand really what that means, so I'll give them that. Invest in services that help shift to a preventive approach. They're not doing that, in my opinion, because they're trying to deal with just getting more operations. I guess you can argue you can't argue routine operations is a preventative approach. So I think that one's an L. Stand up for universal services, defend our NHS. Again, they're promoting privatisation, so that one's broken. Support the abolition of tuition fees and invest in lifelong learning. Again, they're not going to get rid of tuition fees, so that's 6 that they've broken. Put the Green New Deal at the heart of everything, that's 7 broken, because that's not true. There's no issue more than the future, blah, blah, blah. That one they've kept, so we're up to 7. No more illegal wars, which, again, we can't really verify. I've not seen any detail on the illegal Prevention of Military Intervention Act, but I guess we'll give them that. But putting human rights at the heart of foreign policy, again, that's broken because, again, they're supporting Israel in their genocide. So that's 8 broken. Review all UK arms sales. I mean, that review is going to happen. But again, you're not promoting peace and human rights. That fundamentally, that one's broken there. The common ownership one, the only one they've promoted is male. So the rest of this is broken. So we got here. So we're up to 8. So it'd be 9, 10, 9, 10, 11 broken. Ending outsource the NHS, that's 12. And so they haven't mentioned the justice system and local government. They only mentioned the NHS. So that's 12 broken. 13, full voting rights for EU nationals, broken. Defend free movement, broken. What's that, 15? Immigration based on compassion, 16, broken. End indefinite care, detention. I mean, they haven't mentioned anything on that, so we'll give them that one. So 16, broken. Work shoulder to shoulder with trade unions. I think these ones were fine. Again, like with the industrial, they wanted to keep industrial action and weakening of workplace and stop the weakening of workplace rights. Again, with the 0 hours contracts. All right, we'll give them this one. We're up to 17 anyways. These ones, they're wishy-washy, they're fine. Abolish House of Lords, 18, they're not going to do that. So we're up to 18 now. This one, he didn't give them, so I'm not going to give them either. And then they had, this one was fine. I think unite our party, promote pluralism, and improve our culture. I don't think they have done that, to be honest, because, again, they've kicked out a lot of the dissenters, people like that. So we're up to 20. Robust eradication of anti-Semitism, again, they've done that one, that's fine. Maintain our collective link with the union. So we're up to 20 broken from here. And if we look at, 20 broken out of the 48, so that's like, almost just under half. And if you look at the ones that have been broken, it's the ones that offer specifics. I think they're the ones that have been broken, because the wishy-washy ones, it's hard to say whether they're broken or not. But in terms of promoting economic justice, they haven't done that, because they're not going to pull capital gains in line with income tax. How can it be that you can make money off stocks and shares and pay less in tax than someone who actually has to earn a living? So economic justice, that one's out in my opinion. Social justice, 2-child cap, out. Climate justice, again, saying that the government are, should be, they're not going to get rid of the contracts to drill North Sea oil. They're not going to put the Green New Deal at the heart of everything they do. So fighting for climate justice, I think that one's out. That's broken. Promote peace and human rights, that one's broken. We've already gone through that one. Common ownership, broken. Defending migrants' rights, broken. Strengthening working rights, this one's fine. Devolution one, I think that one's fine. Equality. Given, we could argue, okay, that given the different types of racism that are being allowed to ferment in the Labour Party, when asked about Muslim councillors leaving the party said, one of the insiders said, "Oh, we're just shaking off fleas." Do you think that kind of party is promoting BAME representation and equality? The party that's treated Diane Abbott in the way it has done, despite what she said, even though she apologised, just like Steve Reed and others apologised for the things that they have said. Would you say that's a party promoting equality? I don't know. You're treating people very differently. I'm not going to allege that it's because of Diane Abbott's skin colour, because I don't think it is. I think it's down to a personal vendetta against them, against her. Sorry. So I'm not going to give them that one. And effective opposition to the Tories, okay, we'll give them. So when we go through the list, right, we said about 20 out of 48 are broken, and a lot of the ones that we've kept in, I think we've been a bit generous on. So, again, economic justice, broken 1, social justice, 2, broken, climate justice, 3, broken, 4, promote peace and human rights, broken, common ownership, broken, 5, defend migrants' rights, 6, broken. So you've got 6 out of 10 broken. Last time I checked, that's a 60% clip. In my opinion, that's been broken. So again, this idea that, it's only broken a few of them, he's saying the number of pledges still remaining exactly as 2025. This argument doesn't make sense in my opinion.
Even when you take they've all been scrapped, is straight away an obvious bad faith actor.
I think if you're arguing that they've all been scrapped, I don't think I don't think I've ever argued that. I think if I have done, I apologise. That's me. That's something I shouldn't have said. So I'd apologise if I did say that. But point being is like the main important ones, in my opinion, have been scrapped. The big ones have been scrapped. Was a big edit there.
And some may say of some of the others, there are some policies that were clearly there, unambiguous policies that were presented that are no longer there or have been watered down. Well, what gives? Shouldn't he have stuck by all of them? And you could go, well, there's two responses to that. First, we've been hit by
Here we go. Here's the big argument. And I'm going to make the point that, once again, Clement Attlee, at 200% debt to GDP, right, founded the NHS. He borrowed the money and he founded the NHS. So the argument of we don't have the money is simply not true. This is down to public perception. That's the answer. He does mention that, and we'll talk about why that's important.
COVID, war in Europe, and Liz Truss. Now, all of these were incredibly destructive and caused Labour to have to change their policies to meet a change in reality and a change.
It's not about a change in reality. Again, they could borrow the money to renationalise these, because the bond market doesn't care really about debt to GDP ratios as long as they think they're going to get a return on investment. When you look at France, again, higher debt to GDP ratio, borrowed money to nationalise EDF because the market thinks they'll get a return on it. That's why that happened. So this argument of the state of the economy, like, realistically, we should be borrowing more to invest so we can get out of the doom cycle we are in. Again, like, when you go back to, America, for example, with FDR and the New Deal, Herbert Hoover, I think his name was, the one who built the Hoover Dam. Again, these are big investment projects that created jobs. So this argument of, the economy's cooked and all this stuff is just so economically illiterate. It is unreal. It's honestly unreal.
In public perception.
And anyone who pushes these kind of things, right, in my opinion, either doesn't understand economics or is a complete fraud. Is a complete fraud, in my opinion, especially when we had one of the greatest economists live in this country. One of the ones that changed economics, in Keynesian economics. And for people to either not understand Keynesian economics or just straight up ignore it is one of the most fraudulent things I've seen, especially from someone who claims they're a socialist in Phil.
Because if you stick to a set of policies that would appeal to the public at one time and it no longer appeals to them in a few years' time, you're just losing the election again.
And that's what it's about. All it is about is, at first I thought he's just a massive, like, a Labour or Starmer fanboy, but it's not that. He just hates the Tories. So anything that gets rid of the Tories, he'll back, regardless of how bad it is. When you look at the video that he's made here, it's not good. And, he'll attack people, I think, in this video about bad faith actors. When he's been the bad faith actor, like, a lot of these policies they've broken, especially the ones that offer specifics, I counted around 20. And that's, a lot of the ones that they were allowed to keep are the wishy-washy ones, or ones they haven't been asked about in a while. I wouldn't be surprised if you asked them about things like Yarwood, has their position changed on ending indefinite detention, things like that. I reckon if you asked them about it, just like when they were asked about full rights for EU nationals, they crumbled on it. They crumbled completely. So I would not be surprised if that didn't happen with other policies.
Secondly, the people who are basically complaining about this are the same people who saw Jeremy Corbyn change his policies over a 4-year period without a murmur of complaint. So it could just be argued that they're not being the most consistent.
Just say it, bruv. Just argue it then. Don't say it could be argued. Just say it. Just say it. Big man, just say it. Honestly, right, it's that's such a cowardly take. Maybe he moved to better policies. Maybe people were happy when he moved to backing a second referendum. I'm sure that's a policy you would have backed. You would have given credit for. I will give you credit if you move to policies that are better. If he moved to... If Starmer moved more to the left and said from these pledges, we're going to nationalise the infrastructure for the internet. We're going to build fibre optics for every house. We're going to connect up the country to get high-speed internet, because we understand how important that is for people. Especially as we move to more of the digital age, more to content creation, more to people being media producers and content producers, stuff like that. I would back it. So this argument of under Jeremy Corbyn changed policies, no one said anything, so these are clearly, you could say, bad faith actors. Cowardly in my opinion.
But yes, 4 years of turmoil in the UK and abroad, and yet almost all of the pledges are, despite the rhetoric from the hard left, completely intact.
Who is the hard left? Especially when we actually look at who are some of the people saying this? Is this lady off the hard left? This lady from Politico and Kirsty Walker of Newsnight?
So those pledges were to get him through that leadership election and job done. The next task...
So it was a sleight of hand?
I think that's Kirsty Walker in the background.
I think he just sort of, as I said, almost kind of sets himself some homework and then completes it and ticks it off. Now the job... Is
she the hard left? Is Rosa Prince... the Politico editor who's saying Starmer's abandoned his clear policies? Is she on the hard left, Phil?
To get into government, and so far he's being dazzlingly successful, if the polls are to be believed. That job of being leader of the opposition, that the most important thing, as Jeremy Corbyn, as Ed Miliband found to their cost, is to actually win that election, to get in.
So this argument of the people who are making these arguments, they're on the hard left. You know, it's just untrue. This is, you know, the irony, right, of him accusing people of acting in bad faith, despite completely acting in bad faith in this video. When we look at the key pledges, the headline pledges, they're not being backed. When we look at the key specifics, a lot of these have been watered down. Some of these have been scrapped completely. And the other thing is, Labour haven't, as you've said, Labour haven't been asked about these key policies. Do you think we're going to see in the manifesto a specific mention of closing centres like Yarwood? I don't think we would. The reason why he's allowed to keep this in is because no one's asking Labour about these policies. I reckon you go to Starmer, anyone in the media goes to Starmer, and they go through all of these pledges, right? And they ask him about each one, because there's no way you can argue about economic justice without talking about capital gains tax and the fact that the highest earners are not paying their fair share. No way. There's no way you can talk about social justice without talking about things like the two-child cap and the fact that that's one of the biggest drivers of poverty in this country. Gordon Brown said it. This member here, Jack Polanski of the Green Party, has said it. Labour won't commit to things like a wealth tax. How can you argue that Labour are pushing for economic or social justice when they're not pushing these policies that are desperately needed in this country? The fact that Labour are going to keep the two-child cap, and they've said so explicitly, you cannot argue they want social justice when you're going to keep such an abhorrent policy that Labour themselves called obscene, that, you know, Starmer himself, that Rayner herself called obscene, while Starmer said we must scrap punitive sanctions, two-child limit and benefit caps. So unless you're going to factor that in by saying, well, Labour need to win the election, so they had to change the policies, that's one argument. But you cannot simultaneously argue Labour needed to change their rhetoric and policies, whatever, to win the election, but also claim these policies are intact. It's simply untrue. Based on the moral case of socialism, here is where I stand. Get out, honestly.
Brother, what's that? What's that, brother?
Honestly, I wouldn't have been as mean, I think, in this video. I would have done the classic smoking the pack gif and left it at that. But when you're accusing others of acting in bad faith, when you're the one acting in bad faith, all it does is make me feel like it's just once again walking back into hell, because this is a really bad faith video, genuinely a bad faith video. It's embarrassing. Like, again, like, you know, I think he is blinded by his hatred of the Tories, and that's what clouds his analysis. It's just, you know, like the fact that it's frustrating when you get people like him who accuse others of bad faith, who act in bad faith, and when Labour, you know, get called out on it, they call these people Tory enablers.
That's right. Don't blame yourself. Blame me.
I'd have a lot more respect for these people if they just said, yeah, Labour are washed. That's kind of what Marina Perkins says, yeah, Labour are washed, but then the Tories, so we have to vote for them. I'd have a lot more respect for that, honestly, rather than trying to pretend Labour are this good party that we should enthusiastically support. Because, as we said, we've gone through that. We've criticised Labour in the past over certain things that were said. You know, the idea that they're promoting equality when you have people within the Labour Party, you know, at least a person within the Labour Party talking about shaking off fleas regarding Muslim councillors. It's shocking. It's shocking, and
I fail to see the logic here.